Hello, this is Dr. Rutledge, and I'm going to be talking to you today about saturated fat and your brain. And so there's some new research, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll go ahead on that. All right, good. The keto diet or high-fat diet and brain damage. How a high-fat diet, including animal meat, dairy, and eggs, kills critical brain cells and leads to brain damage. There have been lots of articles on this, and obviously the meat, dairy, and egg companies don't want to show you much information about it, but also a lot of people are confused about it. So I'll try and go through some of the topics and some of the recent research, which I think is pretty impressive. First of all, I want to talk to you about astrocytes because that's the main research that came out today. Basically, they are important in the main structure of the brain. They are important in the cells, the neurocells, and also neurotransmitter between cells, and also the structure between them. They also maintain the blood-brain barrier, and they're closely linked to the connections between each cell. And you can see that this is a healthy, not so healthy, and damaged astrocytes. They look like a star. That's how they got the astro name. They have regulatory function. They do all kinds of things in the brain. They're involved in the growth of nerves, the growth of the connections, which are really important, the blood-brain barrier, as I mentioned, and extracellular, keeping things stable, homeostasis. And they also express some genes that are enriched for the children of cells and suggesting they can retain a ability to regrow nerve cells, which if you lose nerve cells, to grow some would be a good thing. And how do the astrocytes protect the brain? Where they produce a strong antioxidant response to protect themselves and the neurons. And they have an important role in scar formation. It allows astrocytes to regulate and contain the immune response in a manner that controls inflammation in the brain. And so, of course, sometimes inflammation is very valuable and important, but other times it's just harmful because it's basically like setting off a bomb. And if it kills some bacteria, that's good. On the other hand, if it kills nearby brain tissue, that's bad. So it's important in controlling that. A lot of research has shown that brain diseases are characterized by active inflammation. The state of the astrocytes makes a big difference in this inflammation. And so neurodegenerative diseases of all kinds, including Alzheimer's disease, Huntington's disease, and just for aging of the brain, all seem to be affected by this single pathway. Astrocytes can drive the induction and progression of inflammation. So inflammation makes all these brain diseases. Astrocytes make inflammation, and so they contribute to altered neuronal activity in several forms of cortex, that's the top of your brain, pathologies such as stroke and epilepsy as well. And so here's some research. We're going to talk about this. Astrocytes cause neuronal deaths, which induced Alzheimer's disease in this study. And the title of the article's report said researchers in closer to establishing the causes of dementia. And basically the Brain Science Institute in Korea showed that the astrocyte damage through its release of oxidative stress damages the neurons, and the neurons are how we think. And over time, this activity leads to brain damage in their study. Now, as we know, Alzheimer's disease, most people know about it. It's important. Many people fear it appropriately. And Alzheimer's disease worsens over a long period of time. And basically, it's a progressive damage to nerve cells. And in the late stages, there is loss of nerve cells which can't be recovered. So what we'd like to do is understand what we could do ahead of time. So what is the cause before death of the nerve cells begins? And researchers confirmed that severe reactive astrocytes irreversibly kill the neurons and advance Alzheimer's disease. So in other words, we're learning more about what causes Alzheimer's disease, and it's coming from astrocytes and their inflammation and oxidation, leading to damage in the brain. In this particular research, the team found that excessive hydrogen peroxide originated from monoamine oxidase in severe reactive astrocytes. That is, basically, to say it in a more pedestrian way, is the astrocytes get irritated for some reason. They think it's important to start killing things around them, and they start causing neuronal cell death. And this leads, because you lose a lot of nerve cells, to brain atrophy. And then this leads to inability to think or cognitive impairment. Okay. All right. So now what this particular study from October 6, 2001 from NYU, they found that toxic animal food-derived saturated fatty acids were to blame for brain cell death. Okay, so let me say that a couple more times. They found that saturated fatty acids released from the brain cells, particularly the astrocytes, damaged and killed brain cells. Okay, and they felt, and in the articles, they said this finding could advance the treatment and prevention of glaucoma, Alzheimer's disease, and a variety of other brain diseases, because many of these brain diseases seem to be caused by the same underlying mechanism. That is, the astrocytes, which are surrounding the nerves and the other many parts of the brain, when they get angry, they cause inflammation, ultimately cell death, and they found animal-derived saturated fats led to the anger, the upset, the inflammation of the brain cells. Well, then maybe we've also got a way to prevent Alzheimer's disease. Basically, toxic astrocytes. Now, there's astrocytes are just sitting there being cool. When they get activated or toxic, they begin to damage the brain via release of pathologic or saturated fat. Cells that normally nourish the healthy brain, astrocytes, are shown to release toxic animal-derived saturated fats. In other words, the saturated fats are just saturated fats, but it turns out in these situations, they are damaging and kill brain cells. Let me say that again. The saturated fats that you eat in meat, dairy, and eggs come out of the astrocytes because of inflammation, and they kill the local neural cells. That's the driving factor they found in most brain diseases that are affected by these nerve situations. Killer astrocytes. Previous research, astrocytes, the culprits behind brain cell death in Parkinson's disease, dementia, and other brain disease. This mechanism, until this study, was not sure how they were doing it, and this study showed that they solved that mystery. The mechanism is the toxic saturated fats. So in this particular study, they had an ability to turn on or off the animal-derived saturated fats in the brain. When the nerves, the astrocytes' ability to secrete saturated fats was turned off, 75% of the neurons survived, whereas when saturated fats were released and formed, only 10% of brain cells survived. Brains continue to function well when shielded from the astrocyte saturated fats. Researchers quoted then and say, our findings show that toxic saturated fatty acids produced in the astrocytes play a critical role in brain cell death. Thus, quote, this is a promising target for both treating and preventing a whole host of brain diseases. Okay, we're going to talk about something else now called brain-derived nerve factor. And BDNF has instructions for making the proteins found in the brain, spinal cord, and the neurotrophic factor, that helps the growth of neurons. The protein promotes survival of nerve cells by playing a role in the growth, maturation, differentiation, and maintenance of nerve cells. So BDNF, good. It helps grow brain tissue. And what they found in this study, a second study back in 2004, a diet high in saturated fat decreases levels of brain-derived nerve growth factor. Again, another study, this one quite a while ago, showing the high-fat diet directly damages the brain. Another study looked at what's called palmitic acid. So let me just mention, palmitic acid is the most common saturated fat in the body, and where we find most palmitic acid in the diet is butter, cheese, milk, and meat, as well as some other oils that are vegetarian. So cocoa butter, soybean oil, and sunflower oil also contain this pathologic fat. So let's be careful out there. And what they found is palmitic acid induces cell death by increasing oxidative stress in the same way as we talked about a few minutes ago, because palmitic acid is a saturated fat. And they found that a high-fat diet caused neuronal and astrocyte damage. CNS damage involving neuroinflammation could be prevented, as they quote in their article, by a healthy diet. So a high saturated fat diet reduces BDNF and also, in this case, induces anxiety and depression. So in other words, the whole brain in all kinds of ways is damaged and harmed by a high saturated fat diet. Obesity and saturated fats cause a downregulation of BDNF, as we talked about, and can be reversed by decreasing the animal fat in the diet and giving them more plant fat of omega-3 fatty acids. Another study showed that a low-fat diet improves or delayed aging because the low saturated fat diet prevents inflammatory activation of the brain's immune cells, the astrocytes we were just talking about in aging mice. How does a high-fat diet damage the brain? That quote, "The science is clear that regularly eating a diet high in saturated fats is damaging to your heart." We all should know that. But here, the new part of my discussion today, it's also damaging to your brain. That's the finding in the new research that focused on the effects of consuming a high saturated fat diet. So, brain disease due to animal-derived saturated fats, brain cell death due to release of toxic saturated fats. The neurotoxic reactive astrocytes induce cell death via saturated fat. This was the study published today from the NYU group in the journal Nature. So, just a brief message: eat healthy food. Don't eat junky animal fat, dairy, or eggs, except for occasionally, just as a special occasion. Anyways, I hope you found this interesting. Brand new research, pretty exciting, and I'll see you again soon.